We're talking about your work in Washington when you first came.
Yes.
And how exciting that was.
Well, it was a very exciting period because there was a lot of support from the secretarial level. And as I mentioned, the department had assembled a wonderful team of scientists chaired by Bob Papendick from an ARS scientist stationed at Pullman, Washington, people like Jim Parr and Jim Swan and others. We had a team of about 10 or 12 individuals who worked at various points along the way on this report, which was finally published in the spring of, or perhaps early summer of 1980. I don't remember the exact date. But we made the decision early on as a team to go out and do farm level interviews. And in retrospect, that was clearly the most critical decision we made. I think if we had done a laboratory kind of report, it would have sounded a lot different. But because perhaps this is worth pointing out, most of the scientists who became part of that team did it because they had curious minds and they were good scientists. But I don't think they came to the project with any preconceived ideas that they were going to be terribly impressed with what they found. But they were willing to go out and look. And I still hold them in high regard for that reason. So the decision was made to go out and do on-farm case studies, and we did 69, a few in all 10 production regions in the United States. And frankly, we're just very impressed with what we found. And we would come back and sort of debrief each other on the farm visits we had done and what we had found. And it was interesting to see how the enthusiasm of the team, particularly those that had gone out and done interviews, began to build over the course of the summer and into the fall as we completed the interviews. Because these, as I say, these were high-level, top-level, top-drawer scientists who were finding some things in the soil structure, soil quality, life of the soil, the soil microbiology in these organic farms that obviously had been using green manures in the rotation and applying animal manures and reincorporating crop residues properly and so forth. They were just very, very impressive. And so the feeling on the team, at least, by the time we were ready to write the report was that this is something worth looking at. Again, no one was saying we ought to drop all of the chemicals and start farming organically universally in the country, but there was a clear feeling that this was a productive, viable option or alternative for farmers that deserved some support. And so we recommended, I think, 10 pages of research that we thought could usefully be done by USDA. And with a good reception at the secretarial level and by Dr. Bertrand, who at that time was the Assistant Secretary for Science and Education, I think there was a feeling of, I think euphoria would be a little bit too strong, because very soon after the report was published, negative responses began to emerge as well. We can go into that a little bit if you'd like, but at least on the team and in most parts of the department, there was a feeling that we ought to put some money into this, and we ought to start looking at it and providing these farmers with some research and educational backup. And so it was an exciting time. It really was.
A question about your team members. Were they from different disciplines?
Yes, it was a truly interdisciplinary team.
How exciting.
And we've heard a lot of talk about the need for that in recent years, but we had one. There were soil scientists, and agronomists, and plant pathologists, and entomologists, and it was economists, and myself as a policy person. They wanted that dimension involved, and so I think that was one of the most exciting and rewarding experiences of my life, really, to be involved in that kind of a team, to begin to see how it really is a system out there, and you do need these various perspectives. One of the parts of the study that was most enlightening, I guess, was a 10-day tour of organic farms in Europe. And as we went around to these farms and interviewed farmers and scientists in some instances who were involved, it was fascinating how we would have different questions to ask, no pre-planning. It was just that different things occurred to different members of the team. And I think that was perhaps the one experience that impressed upon me more than anything else the urgent need to pursue the interdisciplinary approach to this work. It's been said 10,000 times since then in conference and so on, so I'm certainly not saying anything new here, but it is critical, and it's exciting to see universities beginning to move in that direction.
Yes, it is, and I want to talk a little bit more about that later, but what countries did you visit before we leave your tour?
I guess Germany and Switzerland and England were the three that... It was a short and hurried kind of tour, but still enlightening.
Perspective.
Yes.
Well, what happened, Garth?
Well, as I say, there were mixed reactions. Once the report was out and people had a chance to read it, and I fear there are still many who haven't read it. I wish more would. I think it's still relevant reading. Opposition mounted, obviously. People misunderstood the motivation, the goals, as they still do in some quarters. And, of course, there was an election.
Yes.
We had a new president in 1981 and a new Secretary of Agriculture, who in all, I think it would be fair to say, John Block had less enthusiasm for this approach to agriculture than Secretary Berglund had. And so gradually you could sense that support was waning at the top levels. Nothing you could really point to or put your finger on, but there was a feeling that there was less support. And as you know, the position itself was the victim of a riff in 1982.
Yes, a reduction in force.
A reduction in force. So for a time, I think that sent, rightly or wrongly, a signal to at least USDA scientists that this was perhaps a bit controversial, that is the topic. And perhaps I'm wrong about this, but since this is a personal reflection sort of interview, I think it did send a chill through the department. Yes. And there was a period then of some abeyance and some pulling back, particularly within USDA agencies, which, as you know, are much more influenced by the views from the Secretary and top-level people. But even during that period, I think there were still many scientists throughout the land-grant system who had become convinced we should do more, and so there was there were some good developments going on there, and of course the farmers never quit.
No,
the interest there kept on, and there began to develop around the country more and more organizations, grassroots organizations that were pushing for this, and so that effort continued.